All set, Annalisa.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to thank you for attending the opening session for the 5th Annual Align Conference 2021. Our theme this year is the danger of a single story. And where our Worcester team came up with that idea is based and accredited to Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's 2009 TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. For those of you who may not have watched it or seen it before, she goes into account in detail about the danger of a singularity of stories and what that means for individual people. Here at the College of Worcester, we've understood the multiplicity and intersectionality of the first generation and limited income student experience for a while now. A lot of institutions base their policies and resources on a blanket policy form that does impact the general ideas and key areas that FGLI students face, but often sometimes the multiple of their identities is left out. And with that, we think sometimes institutions need to be constantly aware of the different identities that FGLI students hold at any given time, because what one student needs as a resource may not be the same for another FGLI student. And that's really what we wanted to emphasize and focus on for first generation and limited income students. So throughout this conference, we hope you're able to relate and identify with some of the identities we're presenting from the College of Worcester's experience and also build on the narrative sessions we have. We also have a few sessions dedicated to economic mobility as well as COVID-19, because we all know that's been a big stressor and impact on first gen and limited income students. Before we begin to the rest of the session tonight, I do want to do some housekeeping things so everyone's aware. Registration for the conference throughout the weekend is available. If you've only registered for a few sessions, make sure you can register later on. It's going to pop up with the link. So if you decide on Saturday, oh, I want to attend another session, that's totally doable. The session doesn't end. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, if you notice, we have closed captioning at the bottom of the screen showing up. Because of the extension that we're using to make this possible, it might note in the corner that this is streaming live. That is not the case. That is just the general the general idea of the extension. Like, it's just a formality that they have. It's not going anywhere. It's safe within the Zoom account by itself. What I'd also like to note is that this session has to end promptly at 8:25 in order to make the BIPOC FGLI student session start on time. So if you're registered for that, please leave promptly so you're able to attend that session. And again, the BIPOC FGLI session is prioritized for students of color and their experiences. And we will have one of our other keynote speakers that you'll hear from Sunday be present at that, and his name's William Washington. Right now, though, what I'd like to turn your attention over to is Chris Lamb, who is the founder of the Align Conference in general.
Thank you, Annalisa. Welcome to Align. It's so good to see all the familiar faces here, as well as many new ones. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone here for coming to Align 2021, hosted by the College of Worcester. So Align's strength has always been in its community building, and we wish we could be in person. But I think that we can still have that level of community building this weekend through the conversations that happen during our sessions this weekend and outside of them on Discord, which they tell me is what the kids are using these days. So sidebar, if you were feeling overwhelmed by it, or like you didn't know what it was a week ago, same. But if a Luddite like me can learn how to use it and enjoy it through like other parts of my life, I think you can as well. It's worth the learning curve is what I'm saying. And also, I and the Worcester team are happy to help. Speaking of them, they'll introduce, or Annalisa will introduce the Worcester team after I talk, but I just want to also give a shout out. They are not here right now, but they will be here throughout the weekend. Michaela Moses and Joseph Mendoza are my partners from the Aligned Mothership side of things. So yeah, shout out to them for making sure this is a certified stress-free endeavor, 1 year running. And also goes without saying, shout outs to the Worcester team for making this a certified stress-free endeavor, 1 year running. Okay, so community building. In order to do that, we need to bring our authentic selves That means people will be vulnerable. That means spaces here, formal and informal, so that includes Discord, are safe spaces. So that means we will not tolerate any bullying or harassment of any kind. So that means be nice to each other. That's it. That's the minimal level of effort that I need from everyone. And I know it's hard times, which is why that is more important than ever. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap this up with a brief history, or wrap up my allotted 5 minutes with a brief history of Align for the new faces. Um, so in 2015, 4 juniors at Georgetown University, including me, went to the scholarship program that we were in, Georgetown Scholars Program, with an idea for a first-gen low-income student conference, FGLI student conference. Failed twice that first year, and then again when they were seniors and I had transferred to transferred to another school. It was a long story. We got it on the third take in 2017, my last year of college. It was hosted not at Georgetown but at Barnard College, but GSP, Georgetown Scholars Program, was our biggest sponsor. So without them, the whole thing, these 5 years, would not have happened. 90 people came from around the country that year. It was modest, but I thought the program was impactful and people left the conference hyped. I'm hoping similarly for that level of impact and hype, because this is just one weekend. We want this the energy that we get and the relationships that we get from this conference to continue afterwards. Virtual is weird, but I think we'll pull through, having made some new friends and gotten some energy out of this to continue the work that we've been doing as student leaders, as professionals supporting those student leaders, as volunteers supporting those student leaders. 2018, we had our conference at George Washington University. 2019, we had it at UVA. I see Josh Ferris here. Shout outs. He was the director, co-director for that conference. But the last thing I want to say is, in 2020, major shout outs and acknowledgments are needed for the Virginia Commonwealth University and University of Richmond teams who planned last year's conference and got a pandemic in return. So yeah, Elizabeth Bambakis and Lisa Miles were the admins involved from VCU and U of R respectively. And then Patrice Branch and John Mirador from VCU were the student directors, conference directors. And yeah, I just wanted to praise their work, even though no one got to see the end product of it. And then also finally, Patrice is graduating soon, I believe, so hire her. Yeah, that's all I got to say. And Lisa will echo it, but I am here for you this weekend. They are here for you this weekend. So I hope you enjoy. And yeah, Annalisa, back to you.
So I talked in the beginning. My name is Annalisa Brand, and my pronouns are she, hers. Side note, if you want a background that says your pronouns, we have that in the email chain that you can access. I am the co-director for the Worcester team side of the Align conference for this year.
All right. Hey guys, I'm the other co-director of Align for this year. I'm an undergrad student at Worcester, like Annalisa is. My pronouns are also she, hers. Oh, I was mirrored for a second. It was totally wrong. Yeah, name's Savannah Sima. Reach out to me at any time. We're really excited for this conference to happen. We've been working really hard on it.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Marissa. I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior at the College of Worcester, and I am working tech behind the scenes. So I'm really excited to be here.
Hey all, my name is Cameron Bragg. I use she, her pronouns, and I am also a senior here at the College of Worcester. I'm a part of the programming team for the Align Conference this year, and we are so excited to have y'all here this weekend.
So we're not sure if Angela and Zoe will be able to join us tonight, but hi, I'm Cesar Lopez. If you've gotten emails, it's been me. If you've seen our social media out on our promotional material out on social media, that's also been me. I'll be here mostly behind the scenes helping Marissa run tech to make sure all our Zoom spaces are functional. If you need any help throughout the conference, please feel free to let me know. We're here for you to make sure that your experience is amazing. Yeah, so I'll turn it back to Annalisa.
So on that note, we're going to remind people about the schedule tonight. We have Dr. Choi speaking 6:45 to about 7:30, and then around 7:30, we're going to have our second keynote speaker, Dr. Rosamanta, join us. And to set the stage, we just wanted to let everyone and remind them that being first generation and or limited income is not easily visible, but it plays a large part in your college experience. This session, as the opening session with keynotes, are meant to illuminate the nuanced need of FGLI students for resources and assistance. Not every story is the same for FGLI experiences, and it manifests differently for each person's time at the college. You know, there's a danger in a single story of the FGLI experience that prevents students' unique needs from being addressed all the time. And with that in mind, we want to welcome Dr. Charmaine Choi as the first generation program manager at Georgia, soon to be Georgia Tech, who will present on her own unique experiences of the FGLI journey. And later tonight, Dr. Lindsay Romasanta will be joining us from Catalyst First, and she will also bring her unique perspective. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Charmaine Choi.
Oh, thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for the introduction. First and foremost, I would like to thank the team at the College of Worcester for the opportunity to speak to first generation students that are attending the 5th annual Align conference tonight. And it is indeed an honor. Let me share my screen, hopefully, to get my presentation going. Hopefully I don't have any issues. Can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, wonderful. So I will be discussing unpacking intersectionality within the first generation student identity and how important it is to unpack these intersections. So the first thing that I want to do, and quick shout out to my Virginia Tech students who you see gracing the slides here early on in the beginning. But I wanted to definitely make sure I give them a shout out. So this evening I will be unpacking intersectionality by first discussing the first generation identity, lived experiences that first generation students have faced that may have shaped their identities. And then that will be followed by how the first generation identity overlaps with other diverse identities that we hold. So first, I want to talk about the definition of first generation. So a student is identified as a first generation college student if neither parent has earned a bachelor's degree at a college or university in the United States. And I know that a good number of you here are first generation. However, you will be surprised about there's a lot of students that are coming to campus that either doesn't know that they are identified or should identify as a first generation student, or they do know that they identify as a first generation student, but don't want others to know that they hold that identity because they want to try to fit in. So they want to be seen as normal, which first gen students are normal. However, this is a wonderful identity in my experience to hold. So in my work, I try to make sure that students embrace and celebrate this identity. So let's talk about some of the perspectives and lived experiences that some students have shared with me, and also in my own experience that I've had. So one of the first things that students talk about is, number one, how they owe it to their families, because they are the first to attend college, how they owe it to their families to finish college. They're carrying that torch. They are, the persons that the families are seeing as the one that's going to cross the finish line and make the family proud. And that is a very large burden to carry for students. Another perspective that students have shared with me is no family support. While some family members are able to support and do come, to say, for instance, to drop them off at their dorms and to decorate their rooms and buy all the necessities. There are some family members that aren't able to do that. Mom may be working 2 jobs and not able to drop you off. So, you have, your aunt, your uncle, or in my situation, it was my cousin that dropped me off at college. So you have these experiences where there's not a lot of family supporting because they really don't understand what the student is going through and those experiences. So they are missing that family support in that unit. Another perspective that I heard from students is that they're not wealthy. They're comparing themselves to other students who are well-to-do, who do get to go on those vacations and have those amazing spring breaks and, maybe a first-gen student if they are from a low-income background. And not to say that all first-gen students are from low-income backgrounds, but some students are where they have to go home to help the family during spring break or during winter break. They have to go home and work another job, or they already work in multiple jobs while they're in college to make ends meet. And then finally, missing home and their families. I had a student who she just really wanted to go home every weekend. They missed the family back home or their friends back home. And even in my own experience, that was the same thing that I experienced myself as an undergrad, and wanting to go back home and see my family and see my friends from back in the neighborhood. So that takes away from students being able to integrate into campus life and really get involved. They're not connecting with the campus in that way. And there were some other lived experiences that I heard earlier on today during our panels in the Commonwealth conversation, where they talked about navigating large campuses and not knowing the resources available and what was available to them. So those are some lived experiences that students are having that really shapes their journey on a college campus, and also plays into the identity. And so next we're going to jump into talking about intersectionality. And I want to give credit to Dr. Crenshaw, who coined this term in 1989, when this was something new. This was a new concept or theory. And so she described it as how race and class and gender and other individual characteristics, they are intersecting with one another and overlapping. So your lived experiences are important in shaping who you are. And also these individual characteristics that we're going to talk about in the next slide, they really also play into who you are. And we're not a single identity. The first generation identity is not just the identity that we have. That's one identity that we celebrate, but there's so many diverse identities within us that play into who we are and shape who we are. So your first generation identity is a very important one, but you also have to embrace your other identities in shaping your voice and who you are and what you're bringing to the classroom and bringing to your future. So let's talk about those different intersectionalities that I mentioned in the last slide. So we're talking about number one being geographic location. Did you grow up in an urban area versus a rural area? Your income, are you from a low income family background? Are you from a middle class background, a wealthy background? That plays into your intersection. Immigration status, are you an international student? Are you a US citizen? That plays into your journey and what you experience as a college student. Definitely your race. Race plays a very important part in your intersectionality. Are you a person of color? Are you white? Are you multiracial? That's very important in shaping who you are and the experiences that you've had, not only in your past, but in your future. Your religion, are you from a religious background, Christianity, Catholic, all types of different religion, or do you not, was religion not big in your home? That shapes in, again, what you believe in, your ethnicity, your education, again, being first gen, being the first in your family to go to college, or versus your parents having gone to college, and that you having those experiences. If you are second generation, then your family, already knows how things go, and they can, dictate and tell you what to do and how to navigate college better than someone who's first gen and their family doesn't know. Then you're a little bit more independent in that world. Your language, are you from a foreign country? Do you speak English, or do you have to learn the language? Or are you bilingual, multilingual? Your family status, again, is your family well-to-do? What type of background does your family have? And then your gender, are you female, male, trans? That plays a part in your journey as well. Your heritage, your history is so important. The history of your family, and that background, and what that brings to your lived experiences in your life, is very important. Finally, your sexuality. Are you LGBTQ, or are you heterosexual? Again, that plays a part in what your experiences are, and what you bring to the table as far as your diverse voice. So I want to talk a little bit about myself and my own first gen plus, my own journey into what how I grew up, and how my lived experiences, along with my diverse identities, how that has shaped who I am and the work that I do today. So again, of course, I am first generation. I carry that as a badge of honor. I own it. I love it. I believe in it. I shout it. I wear it because I have t-shirts that say that. And so that's something that I celebrate. And in my work, I make sure that students know that I own this identity, and I want to teach them how to celebrate that. African-American, I'm an African-American female. Again, that's another badge of honor that shapes me, that has shaped my journey, especially growing up in the 70s and the 80s, and being an African-American. My experiences and the things that I've experienced in my lifetime with racism, and trying to make it, and having to go past these assumptions and misconceptions about African Americans, has played a part in the work that I do. Coming from a low income background, I am from a low income background. My mother, my parents were divorced, and my mother raised me alone. So I come from that single parent background, and I had to watch my mom work hard to raise me on her own. So that played a part in who I am, and me having to raise my own daughter on my own because her father's deceased. So that has played a part in my journey, because watching my mom do it, I know how to do it myself. I am from rural North Carolina, so from the rural South. My Southern roots definitely have shaped me and who I am. And that is so important in who I am, and the work that I do, and going back to where I'm from, to make sure that I educate others, and making sure I talk to the students in the area. I am from Lumberton, North Carolina. If anyone is familiar with Lumberton, that is near Fort Bragg, it's a very small town. In Lumberton is a very small town in North Carolina. So That is where I was born. You know, I'm the type of person that played in the dirt and made mud cakes, mud pies, all that good stuff, played four squares. So that is my background. And I think that it has shaped me and humbled me in who I am. And I'm from a very large family as well. To give you a little context on that large family, my grandmother had 16 children and my mom is number 10. And so we got a very large family. My aunt, the number 2 out of 16, she had 22 children, 56 grandchildren, 106 great grandchildren. So that tells you how large my family reunions are. And yes, we do have family reunions. So that's the background that I'm from. And again, I tell you, that has really humbled me and how I serve students and the work that I do. From a Christian background, Church of Christ, raised in that, religion, my heritage. My grandfather was a sharecropper. My grandmother was a healthcare worker. My other grandmother was a home provider. She, you know, used to keep us while all my aunts and uncles were working. She would keep all the kids during the day. And that's how I got to play with my cousins all the time. And then my mom and my dad, and, you know, they all started out as factory workers. So that is my heritage, that's my history as far as my family and what they did for a living. But one thing that was, you know, the theme and what I think that really serves me today is that both of my families on both sides, they always gave back. They always gave to the community. They always gave to others. My grandmother, the one that had the 16 children, when anybody would pull up in her yard, she would always say, get out, come inside, and rest your hands, rest your feet and hands. And she would give them whatever she had cooking on the stove. She would offer people food and whatever else that she had, and made sure that people were fed and that she was sharing everything that she had. And they would also, you know, talk on the porch for a long period of time to people and just listen to their problems and issues and help out any way that they could. So again, I think that really shaped me and who I am and the work that I do today. So going back to my motivation, and again, just talking about my First Gen Plus, you know, my diverse identities and how that has shaped me. My motivation for promoting first generation student success, again, comes from my own personal experience as an African-American first generation student from rural North Carolina. When I was in high school, I had no clue what a guidance counselor was or what their role was. And I did not see any students of color visiting this guidance counselor's office or him sharing with us his role at the school. And I feel like there was a misconception there that rural students of color had no plans, and this is in the 80s, early 90s, that we had no plans to attend college. But I was the exception. And a lot of my friends were the exception as well. I was fortunate enough that my aunt and uncle took me to tour UNC Chapel Hill when I was in 4th grade. So if I would have not gotten that opportunity, I don't think I would be where I am. When I toured Chapel Hill in 4th grade, and I said, this is where I want to go. And that was my goal from the time I saw it to the time that I was accepted. I was very ambitious. And again, you know, there's this misconceptions about African Americans in rural counties, you know, not being ambitious enough to say, hey, this is the institution I want to go to. But again, I was blessed enough to have an aunt and an uncle who said, hey, let's take them to see a college campus so they'll know what this is. And I'm ambitious, just like the strong women before me. So when we talk about their heritage and history, we talk about the strong women that raised me into who I am today and what they brought to the table. And so I want to make sure that I pass that on, I carry that forward. So I'm very thankful, honestly, that I didn't get a chance to meet that guidance counselor because he may have encouraged me not to apply to Chapel Hill, maybe put it in my mind that I couldn't have gotten in. So sometimes things happen for a reason, right? So maybe that happened for that reason. So when I arrived to Chapel Hill, my freshman year, I found it difficult to navigate a large campus. And back in those days, there were no first gen programs in place for students that were first generation. That term wasn't even being used back then when I was a student, but it was a thing because I experienced everything that first generation students experience, but there was just no term for it. There was no programming for it at that time. And I knew very little about the resources, just what was sent. And it was very difficult to navigate that campus because it was large. And I will say I owe my success to faculty and staff who chose to mentor me. They introduced me to opportunities and resources and experiences that would benefit me in the future. And shout out to Pamela Cheek, who was my mentor at one of 2 jobs that I had at Chapel Hill. And one of the things that I will never forget that she told me when I attended Chapel Hill, she told me that if I wanted, because I was working at Hardee's and I was working at the UNC campus wide, and she told me, if you wanted to work at Hardee's, you could have stayed at home instead of attending this fine institution. Because my grades were suffering at the time. And she took an interest in me. She saw more in me than I saw in myself at the time. And I think I really had lost my vision of why I was there. So for her to sit me down and have this blunt conversation with me really impacted me and really impacted my path and what I did. And she encouraged me from that point. She encouraged me to apply for scholarships that I knew nothing about. She encouraged me to apply to journalism school at Chapel Hill, which I was blessed to have another faculty member of color who helped me get in. And I didn't even have the GPA. I didn't have the GPA to get into this program. But I sat there and talked to this professor for hours. And he took me downstairs and he said, admit her. And that was it. And that's all I had to do. And I was just amazed. And I was so blessed to have Professor Chuck Stone, shout out to him, rest in peace, to Professor Chuck Stone, to again, be a person of color, faculty member, to take an interest in me and wanted to see me succeed. So I was able to get into journalism school based on that. And they taught me how to effectively self-advocate for myself. And they encouraged me to get involved in opportunities both on and off campus. So my experiences and identities that I just told you about, that I just shared with you, led me to the work that I do today for students. I feel the need to pay it forward to first generation college students through my work, based on those experiences that I had and people blessing me with these opportunities and teaching me all these things. I have to teach that to other students. I have to teach students how to self-advocate and encourage them and make sure they know about resources and internships and all that good stuff. I have to do that work. So this is what has influenced me in doing this work. So my question to you all is, how does your identities and lived experiences shape you and who you are? How does that influence you and your strengths? How does that shape your strengths? How does it shape your voice? Because again, you don't have a single identity, you have a multitude of identities. So how does that shape your identity? So we have to think about how intersectionality plays a part in how we support students. It's a driving factor in how faculty and staff on campuses support students. And so just like the assumptions I talked about earlier and the misconceptions, that can lead to bad programming if we don't look at all your identities and your lived experiences in shaping the programming that we have for you. And this can be a powerful catalyst for change at any institution, when we know what your experiences are. And the only way we're going to know what your experiences are if we're going to sit down and talk to you about those experiences. And if you share your identities with the people that you trust on your respective campuses, and us getting to know you and who you are, so that we can make sure that you have the proper programming in place. So how do we get you all to bridge your intersectionality to a growth mindset? First and foremost, you got to know what your needs and strengths are. You got to know what your strengths are. And so I encourage you, if your campus has a strength finders test that they encourage you all to take when you come to campus. Sometimes campuses have it for free. I know Virginia Tech has strength finders for free. They really are big on that. And so if you don't have access to that, I would suggest that you get this book on strength finders. It's a very small book, and you take a test, and that will tell you what your top 5 strengths are, so you can know exactly what your strengths are. And your strengths and your identities are your assets. So once you know what your strengths are, then you can lean into those strengths and lead into your assets and bring those with you to the academy, because this is so important that you incorporate your voice and your strengths into your campus, into that classroom. Don't let anyone ever tell you that your voice doesn't matter, or if your question is a dumb one. There's no such thing as dumb questions. There's no such thing as dumb comments. It's from your perspective, and you are supposed to incorporate your perspective into the classroom. Make sure you engage your strengths in your work, your extracurricular activities, and your everyday life. I can't stress enough about self-advocating for yourself. And especially some people were talking about that earlier today, as far as like financial aid, that financial aid and having to deal with all that has taught them how to self-advocate, because your parents can't do it for you all the time. Once they drop you off on that campus, you are on your own. So you got to start advocating for yourself in these spaces, and making sure that people know that you are there and you are in the room, and that you belong in the room. And normalize your failures. I can't stress that enough, to normalize your failures, because a lot of people will take that failure and they will hold on to it. They'll hold on to it in their hearts and hold on to it forever. You learn from it. Make sure that you're learning from your failures as well as your successes. When you fail forward. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of the book called Fail Forward. I encourage you to read it. John Maxwell, Failing Forward. But when you fail forward, make sure you learn from it. You don't just internalize it. You learn from it. So bringing your assets, again, understanding your assets and bringing those to the academy. Your assets are your strengths and your lived experiences. Understand those, bring them to the academy to make change. So I always talk to faculty and staff about what they can do to support first generation students, but you all have to make sure that you are letting them know what they need to do to support you. Also, I want to say to make sure that you are talking to your faculty members and your classes and your staff members on campus. Let them get to know you. Let them get to know what's special about you and those diverse identities that you have, so they won't make those misconceptions and assumptions about you. So as much as we have to tell them how to support, it's also up to you guys to meet them in the middle and speak up and let them know who you are. Again, stop looking at your challenges as shortcomings. And we just talked about that a minute ago, about your challenges and your failures. And don't look at those as shortcomings. And that includes your identities, and not looking at those as shortcomings, because they are so important in incorporating who you are and what you bring to the table, as far as the work that you're doing and what you're going to do post-graduation, because that's going to be a whole new journey. You need to bring your assets with you in that regard as well. and shift from shortcoming interventions to celebrating and enhancing your identity. That's not only the first gen identity, but the other diverse identities that you hold. Make sure that you celebrate those. I celebrate my identities all the time, and they're very important to me. Again, like I said, they shape who I am. They shape the work that I do. So what's, again, what we talked about bringing your assets to the academy. Normalize the process of college transition and learn institutional values, learn academic strategies. And again, if these things are hidden, then approach someone about helping you find out what the institutional values are. What are some academic strategies that you need to learn and know to help you succeed, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, and making sure that you know what the institutional resources are. In addition to the institutional resources, but also making sure, you know, when you are preparing for post-graduation in your career, and you already know what you want to be, then making sure that you are connecting with people on campus that's going to help you coordinate those steps into getting to where you want to be post-graduation. Contribute to the institutional shift and help faculty and staff and college community, again, see the importance of your voice and your contribution to the community. So speak up. Again, these diverse identities that you have, these are your voices. Make sure that you are speaking up and not being quiet. Make sure that people know that you are in the room, and making sure that your perspective counts, because it does. And like I talked about before, incorporating your diverse voices and perspectives inside and outside the classroom. They are important. And creating that community, belonging, sense of belonging is very important. It was interesting enough, I had a staff member, a faculty member mention to me that the whole concept of sense of belonging was cult-like, which I couldn't disagree more with that notion. You want to create community. You want to create community with like minds, with like identities. You want to create that community. This is why we have living learning communities. This is why we have, you know, living learning communities that are for first generation students, for African American students, you know, all types of living learning communities that are coming up on college campuses. Make sure that you, you know, engage in those, as well as student organizations that are based on your interests and your identities as well. And finally, connect your lives to what you are doing. So making sure that you connect your lives to your academic work, to your identities, all that good stuff. Make sure everything is in lockstep. So I just want to say thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you all this evening. And I am happy to take questions at this time. And if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat. But thank you so much.
As Dr. Choi just said, if you have a question, you can either go ahead and drop it in the chat right now, and we'll give you a few seconds to do that. Or you're able to, I believe you can like raise your hand on this function for Zoom, and you can do that as well. As questions come into the chat, I'll read them out loud for everybody. So we do have a question from Savannah, and then I also see we have a hand raised. So I'll go Savannah first, and then I will call on Erica. So Savannah's question is, how do you feel like your experience as a rural FGLI woman shaped your college experience versus being from a larger city?
Oh, wow. I feel like it shaped my experience in a good way, actually, because I think it made me a little more humble. Like I told you before, and these are some things that I really don't mind sharing with people about me used to making mud pies back in the day when I was a kid. That's something I don't mind sharing with people because I think that the experience humbled me. I think it made me who I am as far as being someone that likes to build community and someone who likes to help others. So I think that the rural, background that I come from really shaped my work and really shaped me as far as humility is concerned, and making sure that I'm there for others, and making sure that I give, and help others. And again, being from that rural background and that large family that I talked about, it just really helps you to learn how to talk to others and embrace everyone's different identities, because that's different. That's a lot of different personalities coming from a large family like I came from. And so I think that really, again, has shaped me. But being from rural North Carolina, it also made me know how to say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. Be respectful of my elders because that's how I was raised. So yeah, that's what I think as far as being from a rural background.
I can relate to that a little bit. I live on the cusp of rural and suburban, and it was just so different with stark contrasts of like rural resources and accessibility for like high school counselors, like you mentioned in your speech, and the family motivation to go to college, if that's a thing or not, and what are you surrounded by, and what does your daily life look like? So that really resonated with me because I grew up in a pretty rural area where you see cows and like horses all the time, sometimes buggies from the Amish. So
tobacco fields for me. Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and let Erica ask their question now.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question. What I wanted to ask you was about the sense of belonging for students. How do you foster that, especially at a rural PWI? And then with this virtual environment, how is it that you encourage student engagement? Because what I find is that students are kind of in flux. They're there when they're in crisis in terms of engaging in programming, but it's not consistent. And so I'm just wondering if you could kind of touch on that in your work.
Sure. So as far as my engagement virtually, I think that's what you had mentioned. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So, because I was used to really engaging with students in person, but when COVID happened and we had to go on lockdown, I had to move everything. All my programming had to be moved virtually, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that me and the peer mentors that I have played a really huge part in really engaging students. When we first moved to this virtual Zoom world that we're in, the first thing I wanted to do was check-ins. So I was very intentional about doing the check-ins with students. So I had what I called coffee talks with Dr. Troy. And I sent students on my listserv this message about my coffee talks that I came up with and said, if you need to talk to me, personally, let's schedule a time to talk. And I did get some students that really needed to talk, and spoke with them via Zoom. And then, again, my programming, as far as my programming efforts, definitely had to switch that to Zoom. So we, just like you talked about, we didn't get a lot of engagement as well. But as we consistently had them, we had things pick up. And I think it would depend on what the students were interested in, because, when we, say, for instance, had a panel with Deloitte, we got a lot of students there because they were interested in internships and learning more about Deloitte. When I had say peer mentors had a game night, we had a few students there But my thoughts are, if I touch one student, then I feel like that we're doing great if we can touch one. So we had more than one student come to those types of events with the peer mentors. The peer mentors also, checked in on the students. They had meetings with them on a monthly basis. So that's how we kind of kept the students engaged. And then just the types of programming that we had. It depends on if the student was interested in the program as to how many attended. We had a large turnout for study abroad as well, because students were interested in learning more about that. I hope, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Chris, you're good to go to ask your question.
Thank you for the great talk, Dr. Choi. My
Thank
question is, coming from a selfish point of view, I graduated not so recently anymore, but started grad school. And I guess I was just wondering, when entering that next phase, after graduating college, I know we have, some seniors here might also be thinking about this, but also maybe some recently graduated alumni.
Mm-hmm.
How does, because like your first gen in undergrad as a first gen college student, but you take some of that first gen-ness with you, at least I feel like I do, going to grad school or before going into like my first job out of like after graduating from college. And so what changes and what doesn't is my question.
Oh, Chris, that is a great question. Nothing changes. Wow. And I mean, that's a great question too. I actually last year, some first gen graduate students asked me to join them for a presentation that they were giving, and they brought in all these different entities, these departments at Virginia Tech, and they talked to us about, why don't you serve us? And I thought about that and I was like, well, gosh, why do I not serve them? Because all the programming that we had in place were for undergraduate students. And so I was thinking about my own experiences at undergrad. And, even with my master's program and graduate school, because again, it's the lived experiences. So by the time that I was in my master's program, I was divorced with a child. And so, I had to navigate, trying to be comfortable with being in grad school, but also taking care of my daughter and making sure I made that time for her, in addition to being in grad school. And then with the PhD program, oh, wow. I experienced imposter syndrome for the first time. I'm not, ashamed to say that, but I experienced imposter syndrome for the first time and did not know what in the world it was when I was in my PhD program. It was a lot to work through at the time. And again, doing a PhD program, and I was raising my daughter alone, and thankful to my mom for moving up to help me. So I wouldn't have to take my daughter with me to class, because in the beginning I had to take my daughter with me to class. So I'm really thankful that my professor at the time would let me bring my daughter. So I'm seeing her feeding my daughter dinner in my class, and the professor was letting her erase the boards, God bless them. But if I didn't have someone to come and help me, then I would have anybody watch my child while I was trying to graduate. So I don't feel like any of those things that we experience as undergrads really go away when you are in graduate school. And those students coming to me and telling me that I heard them. And so I started working with a grad student there at Virginia Tech, and we started doing programming for graduate students, because when I thought about my own experiences again, I was like, they need us too. And so I made sure I opened my doors to grad students. There's some grad students I had started mentoring at Virginia Tech as well, because there were conversations that they were needing to have, and things that they were experiencing, like imposter syndrome or procrastination, because they had imposter syndrome and really didn't know what it was. And so, you know, having to mentor them and encourage them and having these conversations. And I made sure I meet with them monthly on Zoom to, you know, talk about that and support them. But yes, definitely, I think there needs to be more programming geared towards first-gen graduate students. It does not end with graduating. It doesn't.
That is amazing advice. Thank you, Dr. Troy.
Thank you.
So at this point, we're going to go ahead and thank Dr. Troy for her amazing speech. It's always great to hear and know that there are faculty and administration at other colleges and institutions that support first generation and limited income students. I know for me personally, it always makes me feel empowered because I know, okay, there's other people who care. Because at college and as a student, you can feel, you know, you're in your small bubble at your university, even if it's a large university, you only know what's in front of you. And so at this point, if anyone else has other questions or thoughts that, you know, Dr. Troy's speech might have provoked from you, I'm going to go ahead and let her, if she feels comfortable, drop her email in the chat. And direct any questions or clarification towards her way. You know, she's very insightful and relatable, which is one of the reasons why we were so honored and thrilled to have her here. At this point, we're going to go ahead and transition to our second keynote speaker for the night. And our second keynote speaker is Dr. Lindsay Rosamanta, and she is part of the Catalyst First. She's part of the Catalyst First speakers, which are for first generation limited income students. And her presentation will discuss and talk about some of her work, as well as her role and time as an advocate in higher education. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Rosamanta.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be in community with all of you. I'm Dr. Lindsay Romasanta. My pronouns are she, her, and sia. And I'm really grateful for the Student Planning Committee for inviting me to share a little bit about my experiences as a first-gen low-income college graduate myself. So the title of my talk today is Casa Bihans, which fuel my first generation low income journey. And again, so much gratitude for all of you that are joining on the call. I'm sure that it's a long day for everybody, especially on Zoom, but I'm sure that this opportunity to just be in community with first gen students and first gen supporters is also so heartwarming for the soul. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and get started. So a little bit about me. I am a child of immigrants. So my family immigrated from Manila, Philippines to Chicago, Illinois in 1967. And it was there that my mom essentially, you know, experienced what it would be like to be a bicultural kid. Someone who was the oldest and had 3 children. One thing that was really fascinating about my family's immigration story is my family is a family of musicians. So they were actually known in the Filipino community in Chicago, Illinois as the Filipino Jackson 5. So in this image is a picture of me and my sister and playing on my uncle's set of drums. Other things to know about me is my mom was a single mother, and she also experienced lots of challenges as she was growing up in Chicago. So when she had my sister and I, she made the really difficult decision to have us grow up in the Philippines with my grandmother. So here's a picture of me actually performing a Hawaiian luau dance when I was attending elementary school in Manila, Philippines. Then when I was 9 years old, I came back to California and then later to Phoenix, Arizona, and started to pursue what my family thought was essentially the American dream. So I ended up going to a predominantly white elementary school, grew up in Arizona, went to a high school where the only people that looked like me were my sister and myself. And I was really fortunate that although my mom didn't have experience going to college, she really emphasized the importance of continuing to pursue educational pursuits. So I ended up attending Arizona State University because it was the university that was down the street. So like lots of other first generation low income students, we choose what's convenient because we also want to be of service to our family. So here's a picture of me with my sorority sisters. So I actually joined a multicultural sorority whose tenets were social justice and community service. So that was one of the first places where I really saw other women like me, women of color, and others from diverse backgrounds who were really committed to doing a lot with their college experience and making the world a better place. I then transitioned, just like a lot of first generation college students, which trying to figure out what is my path going to be. So I changed my major over 8 times when I was in college. I literally had no path to pursue. I was just curious about so many things. And I actually ended up majoring in social work with a certificate in Asian American studies, because that was what spoke to me at the time. And here's another picture of me with a group of students that I worked with when I was working in nonprofit organizations that were dedicated to civic engagement and student leadership. Over time, I sort of like formulated a little bit of my identity. I'll share the different ways that I've collected and selected. I also think that when we're sharing stories about ourselves, it's important to share the personal aspects. So one thing that I like folks to know is one thing that kept me fueled and resilient, especially as a college student and as a professional, was actually weightlifting. So believe it or not, I actually really enjoy things like charity powerlifting meets. My favorite power lift is the back squat. So here's a picture of a weight belt that someone gifted to me after I essentially, learned about what is it about weightlifting. Just like most people, I really wasn't exactly sure what my path or journey was going to be. I was called back to essentially Arizona and started falling into the work of first generation students when a mentor told me about a TRIO grant that Arizona State University had aimed and turned. So through that, I started learning that, first generation support was a career. And since then, I dedicated both my academic journeys and also my professional journeys to that path and ended up pursuing a doctorate. So not only was I the first in my family to attain a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, but I also went ahead and pursued a doctorate. So here is a picture of me with my graduation gown. I often refer to my doctoral process as my 3 stripes journey. So when you pursue your doctoral journey, you would attain 3 stripes, just like what's listed in this gown. And that was something that was really transformative for me because I started to research and essentially publish on, scholarly work related to the unique stories of first generation college students. And now taking today, here's a picture of me and my puppy. So just like most folks that are experiencing the pandemic, I did what a lot of people did, which was get a puppy. So here's a picture of a dog that I rescued named Gus. And he's something that definitely is a huge part of my life now. And I never thought that would happen. So you're probably wondering, why am I sharing these images? Part of the reason why I'm sharing these images is as I was talking with Caesar and Annalisa and really trying to understand, the theme of the concept, I think it's important to, figure out what are the nuances that make people who they are. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what kasabihans mean. So I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next slide. So what do I do professionally? So I currently work at the University of California, San Diego as Director of Student Success Programs. And I oversee essentially 6 student resources that are dedicated to using asset-based and strengths-based support for identity conscious programming and resources for students who are the first in their families to go to college, students who may be undocumented, students that may be transfer, students who may be veterans or military connected, and also international students. Here are some pictures of me and also our entire campus of first gen supporters. So UC San Diego is recognized as a first gen forward advisory institution. So we're seen as a model for the ways in which we try to celebrate, affirm, and most importantly, advocate for the first generation identity at UC San Diego. I also am the co-editor of the NASPA Journal for First Generation Student Success, along with Dr. Roshni Jehangir. And it's really fascinating because to reflect on my life now, I didn't realize that, being a first gen student myself, that it would carve for me this personal and professional path that has been, so rewarding and definitely worthwhile. So where does all of this come from, right? So I really think that When I reflect back on my experience, there's so many components of oral history, narratives, stories that really influence the way that I view the world. So here I've listed 3 words: kasabihan, dichos, and sayings. So kasabihan is a Tagalog word. It essentially means sayings, you know, those different aspects of colloquial wisdom that's passed down from, you know, one generation to the next. So here's a picture of my grandmother. So my grandmother's name is Ruth. She's 82 years old. And she's someone who played a pivotal role. In the earlier slides, I shared with all of you how my grandmother raised my sister and I essentially in the Philippines and got, you know, the second chance to be a mom as my mom was really trying to figure out, you know, how to navigate life as a single mom here in the United States. My grandmother had 3 particular kasabihans, dichos or sayings. So the things that she would impart for my sister and I, so these were common sayings that she would essentially tell us about, right? So the 3 sayings were collect, collect, and then select, which I'll go into a little bit more detail about. The second saying was this concept of lift as you climb. And then this third saying is to whom much is given, much is expected. It's fascinating when I reflect on my life how these 3 sayings have played a pivotal role in every aspect and every single decision that I've made. And I think that it's actually more valuable than any formal education or degree or certificate that I've ever received. It's really central to these 3 kasabihans, these 3 sayings that really influence the journey that I had as a first generation low income student. So I'm going to go into this concept of collecting and then selecting a little bit more. So my grandmother really approached life from this perspective of, listen, I sacrificed a lot to come to the United States so that your mom, your uncles, you know, her grandchildren could essentially have a better life. So she would always tell my sister and I, you know, collect and select, live life from a perspective of abundance, say yes, do things that I never had the opportunity to do things that I didn't get a chance to do because I was, you know, busy raising your uncles and your mom. So she would always tell us, collect and select. And I think that as a first generation low income student, I often felt like, but how? How can I do that? And when I think about the challenge essentially that my grandmother posed to me, it's really led to some phenomenal decisions, and I credit her and her wisdom. So for me, collecting and selecting from an educational perspective, I shared with you my multiple majors and how I ended up landing on social work and Asian American studies. And the reason why is they were really related to the values that I saw my grandmother impart. So even though my grandmother, you know, was essentially raising children on her own, she would always make sure that she had room for others. She would always have an open door with a hot meal for anyone that needed it. She would do community service, helping out in her ministry and in her church. So that's something that I always saw my grandmother represent, that, you know what, no matter what you have, you can always share and give. As I was thinking about collecting and selecting, I ended up actually pursuing a master's degree in Georgia State. And the reason why was Georgia State gave me a fellowship. So as a, you know, first and low income grad, I didn't even know what graduate school was. But when a friend sat down and talked to me about, you know, this is a way for you to advance, this is a way for you to continue to be competitive, I applied to places that I never saw and considered, and Georgia State ended up being one of those places. And again, it was really connected to this concept of lifting as you climb and helping others out. And later on in life, I ended up going back to Arizona State and I started to pursue my doctorate in education and leadership. And the reason why was really because of family. So at that time, unfortunately, my mom got diagnosed with cancer. So I was asked to, you know, be closer to home, which I think is something that a lot of first generation low income students, especially who come from collective backgrounds, are asked to be able to do. So I ended up moving back to Arizona and fell into the trio job that I referenced earlier. My collecting and selecting from the perspective of places I've lived have also been everywhere. So I'm really grateful that my grandmother encouraged me to do that. So I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, but I also spent time in Atlanta, Georgia, I spent a summer in Tanzania doing volunteer work. I now currently live in San Diego, going on 5 years. So I think that when we're first and low income, sometimes we don't consider the paths that are ahead because there isn't anyone that might be mapping the world for us. But through my grandmother's challenge and through her introspection, the collecting and selecting has led to phenomenal things. And earlier I talked about, the other concepts that she said, lifting as you climb, and to whom much is given, much is expected. And how I've done that is through my role as a scholar, practitioner, advocate. I remember when I first started doing research on first generation college students, a lot of the published work that existed for first gen college students were really from a deficit lens. And I remember telling my doctoral advisor, listen, this is not what I know about my own first gen low income journey. And it's certainly not what I see when I connect with my TRIO students on a day-to-day basis. So it's fascinating how all of these, cultural intuition, the lived experience that we have can also be traced back to the ways in which our own family has imparted their wisdom and their stories with us. So I often get this question whenever I connect with students, how did you get to where you are? And one of the things that I will say is that the path was not a golden path. It was not linear, but what I did try to do was really hone in on my values. So I knew that the values that spoke to me, the things that brought me joy, were being of service to others. That made me feel alive. It made me feel joy. It made me feel a sense of energy and synergy with work and purpose. So to all the jobs I had before, so if any of you have seen the movie on Netflix, you know what I'm talking about. So it's an ode to Lara Jean. And I think one of the things that I want to share with first gen low income students is, guess what? There's lots of different jobs, there's lots of different industries, but the most important question is not the title, it's not the field, it's what are your values? What are the things that you can all weave together based on the casabihans, the dichos, the sayings that maybe you grew up with, and the different values that you're infusing as you're doing your own self-reflection. And I think that's the better back path to be able to follow. So I list here the different titles and the different industries to sort of paint that picture that it's all about your values, your purpose, and, self-reflection, honing in on what those different aspects are and who are the people that might be able to expose you to them. So I want to sort of get an opportunity to, hear who's in the room. I know that it's late, but I'm hoping that we could get a little bit of some engagement in the chat, or even if you feel comfortable unmuting and saying. So I shared with you the 3 things that my grandmother told me, right? Collect, collect, and then select. To whom much is given, much is expected, and also lift as you climb. So I'd like you to just take a minute to reflect. For you, what is one saying that you remember that has stuck with you to this day? Whether it was a teacher, whether it was a grandmother just like mine, whether it was, your first high school coach, whatever it is, what is one saying that you remember that has stuck with you to this day? And I'd like you to go ahead and answer questions 1 through 5. So what's your name? Where are you joining us from? What's that saying that has been, ingrained in who you are and what your values might be? I'd like to know, what is the root of it? Like, who told you, when, what was the context? And most importantly, how has it helped you on your path today? So we're going to spend just a couple of minutes on this slide so that folks can reflect. And like I said, I invite you to either type it in the chat or unmute and share a little bit about what that kasabihan dicho or saying has been for you.
I can start verbally. So hey, I'm Cesar Lopez. I'm joining everyone from the College of Worcester, so Worcester, Ohio. The saying that I would like my mom grew up saying is similar to like, to whom much is given, much is expected, but just to talk around it in Spanish. For her, she grew up kind of opening the door to her home to anyone who was community in her eyes. And it was like her attitude in life was that if we have resources to share, if we have the ability to help others, we have no real reason to tell someone no, or to tell someone no, we can't help you. Because if we have a capacity, you should. And I think that has helped me here at Worcester in particular, because like I know as a posse scholar, that facilitates whether people want to say it or not. That facilitates me having access to a lot of resources at my school. And a lot of the times that means that for other students, it's not as easy. So if someone were to ask me a question, to Dr. Charmaine's point earlier, there are no dumb questions. If I know how to help someone, and even if it comes like if I'm taking a minute of my day, I don't lose anything. If I care for someone and I view them as family or community, then I should be willing to help them out. And that's just kind of something that my mom always drills in my head, especially in the days where like it's early morning and someone's came over to the house to ask for help translating a document, and I'm just like, she's like, nope, you're able to, you should help. But yeah.
Hey, I'll chime in. This is Dr. Troy talking. So my grandma always had a saying, she said, be seen and not heard. And she would wag her finger at us. And she would tell us that all the time because we were being loud in church. So for me, be seen and not heard, I always use it or think about, you know, just, you know, being quiet and knowing when to speak. It's very important. So that's why that sticks with me. I also relate to it as, you know, pick and choose your battles. So being seen and not heard, you know, I will speak up and be heard when, you know, it's necessary. I use that for that, you know, that saying, you know, as well.
I'm a remote student. As many of you know, I'm the co-director of this year's Align conference, but I go to the College of Worcester. I'm currently remote. The saying that I was always told is, it's kind of cliche, but it's from my father who passed away when I was 12. And it's like, keep moving forward. Life is hard, but so is sitting still. And you know, I think that just spoke to us as children, like, because I have a twin brother, and we were always known for being very quiet and just sitting still. And then, you know, at points we just burst with all this energy. And I think that was just part of his wisdom of like, he knew how I operated and how my brother operated. We were just very still and like, you know, we're more observant. And so that's really impacted me because whenever I go for an opportunity and I don't get it, I still think, well, okay, maybe someone else who needed that more got it. And so I'm gonna go try for the next thing now.
So I'll share with the group as well. My family is from Prince Edward County, which is the last county to segregate schools, and my mom did not have an opportunity to go to the college of her choosing, but she did go to college. And so what she instilled in me as a young child, even living in neighborhoods that were not that diverse, is that education is an equalizer to equality. And she said that that's one thing that a man cannot take away from you is what you know and then your knowledge. And so that kind of stuck with me. And I know that in college, sometimes I felt as if I was disenfranchised or I couldn't do it, or I was just an imposter in a space and a place that was not designed for me. And I remember when I went to college that my mother gave me a picture of my grandparents. And before my grandfather passed away, my grandmother passed away first. And then my grandfather passed away shortly thereafter from loneliness and being away from his life partner. And so before he died, he told me, he said, and still to this day, when I tell the story, it's emotional. He says to me, your grandmother prayed for you every day that you would continue and complete college. And so I carried on that. And so I need you to finish. And so I remember sitting at the table late at night on my desk and sometimes table in the dormitory and looking at that photo and just crying and saying, can you please just give me some strength, some tenacity, some fortitude to complete this work? Because I'm not sure if I can do it. And so what I would encourage everyone on the call today is to understand that everyone has a destiny and a place. and that you are designed to be there and that you have something to offer. And if you need to get a mantra or a picture to remind yourself in terms of the relative importance, I encourage you to press on, and that all things are possible. And I tell myself this all the time, all things are possible through God who strengthens me. And sometimes it's just a matter of just telling yourself over and over and faking it until you can make it. And so I would encourage you all to do that, and do not let anyone define who you are or your outcome.
Thank you all so much for sharing these wisdoms. I do encourage folks to copy and paste some of these. I'll share with you a little bit about some of my research that talks about how this is all connected, but I appreciate you all reflecting with me and being in community and sharing the kasabihan's, the chosen sayings that have made a difference for you as well. So why does this matter, right? So it all connects. One thing that I think is particularly important to really own and also ensure that we help hold folks accountable to is that lived experiences of diverse college students are often overlooked and misinterpreted. And the danger of a single story, the theme of this conference really hones in on that. Another thing that I think is particularly interesting, especially as someone who identifies as a first-gen scholar practitioner advocate, is that there's increasing attention to first-generation student phenomena, but what comes with that is this double-edged sword. So I'm seeing how for some people, they're trying to oversimplify the experience of first-generation college students when we know while there are similar phenomena, we're not a monolith, right? And I do think that there's a window of opportunity to center authentic student voices to lead to more effective solutions to support students on their own definitions of success and their own social mobility. So I think that it's all extremely related, and we have to ensure that we're honoring the nuances. And I loved my conversation with Annalise and also with Caesar when we said we want to go beyond intersectionality, right? That it's so much deeper than that. And I think that if we continuously have, amazing student leaders and student advocates that hold us to the fire, to the complex nuances of first generation student experiences, that we're going to be fine, right? That I really walked away from that planning conversation with goosebumps and feeling like, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful that I have phenomenal student leaders that we can pass the torch to that get it and know how important it is to really honor the nuanced experiences. So with that, I sort of want to take the next couple of slides to share a little bit about my dissertation research. So earlier I alluded to, the concepts in which I started to read when I was looking at studying my practice, which is essentially looking at first generation student experiences. So a concept that I'm going to introduce to you is photo testimonials. So photo testimonials is the research method that I arrived at that looks at essentially combining photo elicitation and photo voice with this concept of testimonials, which is really honoring the tradition of oral history and photo elicitation. It overcomes the power imbalances between researcher and practitioner. It illuminates what's wrong and urges a call to action. So photo testimonials is the research methodology, and then now I'm going to share with you some of those findings related to this research question of what keeps first generation students fueled. So I shared that when I started looking at first generation research, it was really fascinating to me that there was this dominant narrative that really kept talking about first generation college students from the perspective of lack. So it's from a perspective of what first generation college students didn't have, that they didn't have family support, they didn't have academic preparedness, that they didn't have capital. And every time I would read these pieces, I remember walking away feeling this cognitive dissonance because it didn't sit with the experiences that I was having as a trio counselor, working with students and hearing about the phenomenal ways that they were actually not only resilient, but resilient with a form of resistance, that they had so many aspects of strengths, that they were navigating a space that was not made for them, but still did it with a concept of paying it forward with joy and really ensuring that not only they could have the college experience, but that they could transform and create ripple effects within their community. So I then, began this, personal mission of really challenging the dominant narrative. And that's something that I take with me as editor of the NASPA First Gen Journal. And I love that there's so many scholars out there like Dr. Troy and so many practitioners that are also ensuring that, the ways in which we're speaking about first generation college students talks about the counter narrative, the actual truth, the authentic voices. So now I'm going to share with you some of the photo testimonials that came about through this research study that I did. So some of the themes that really came about when I asked students to reflect on what keeps you fueled as a first generation college student when times get tough. And here students talked about familial and social capital in the same way that kasabihans, dichos, and sayings fueled my persistence as a first and low income student. It was also very similar in the study participants. So here, a student has a cobija. So if you know, cobija essentially is like this really fuzzy blanket, right? Keeps you really warm at night. So the student says, you know what, like for me, the thing that keeps me fueled is, this blanket. It reminds me of my family and reminds me that I'm never alone for when I'm feeling helpless. So in my study, the students talked about the numerous ways that they experienced microaggressions in the classroom and how they often felt as if they had to silence parts of their cultural identity and their first gen identity just to make it. So they would find concepts of their culture through other aspects, things like artifacts in their home. Here a student talks about hummingbirds. So she said, hummingbirds represent my family, my heritage, and my drive to have a better life as well. This keeps me going, right? So these were aspects that really stood out for the students. The other concept that really stood out as a theme was this feeling of gratitude for college opportunity. And I don't want to phrase it from this perspective of, I should be grateful, I shouldn't question it. That was not the truth. Essentially, what the students were saying is they definitely felt this sense of, understanding of privilege that might have been different from other students, but they wanted to change systems as a result of it. So one of my participants, she talked about how she was someone who wasn't documented. And as a result of not being documented, and because she had family members that also weren't documented, college wasn't an opportunity for them. So when it finally happened, when she was able to get permanent residency, and in this particular institution, there weren't state support for undocumented students, it really opened the pathways for higher education. And similarly here, a student took a picture of two things. One is huaraches, which is, essentially sandals, and then military boots. So for this particular first generation college student, she was grateful for the college opportunity because she essentially had to enlist. She had to enlist so that she could just go to college, right? So those kinds of concepts of true stories of resilience were so phenomenal in some of the study participants that came about. Another thing that was a common theme in my research was this concept of work ethic and sacrifice. So in early first generation research, there was a lot of things about the ways in which family could be a distraction for first generation college students. And it's fascinating because for most first generation college students, what keeps them going is their family. So here the student says, when it gets tough, I think about my parents, especially my dad. My dad has worked so hard throughout his life since he was 4, being a slave to the ranch life to now. He busts his back working outside in the blazing Arizona sun. I've never heard my dad complain. I know that what I'm going through would never compare to what my dad has been through. So here's a picture of her father's hands. And I don't know if you can notice, but it's missing a finger. It's missing a finger because her dad was a laborer, used his body so that she could essentially be a college student. And students were picking up parallels in the ways in which they saw their families worked really hard, and they would use those lessons in college as well. So this phenomenon and this perspective that, first generation families don't know. They may not know college, but they do know values. And this is particularly important for a lot of our students that we hone in on the fact that their families contribute so much to their college going experience and their ability to persist. And then one other aspect was this concept of paying it forward. I've done iterations of this study, and this is one of the most salient themes that keeps coming up over and over again. And I think it's evidenced by this being, the 5th year that the Align conference has come about. Students want to change society. They want to pay it forward for others. They want students to not experience what they had. They want students to be able to celebrate their identities. And I think that's one of the aspects that I particularly love about first-gen phenomena, no matter where this study existed, that students want to pay it forward. And I think that's such a beautiful thing that needs to be celebrated a lot more. So in thinking about our own experiences, one thing that I want to share is, as I was going through this study, the participants gained resilience when they heard from each other's stories. So in the same way that you all shared your kasabihan, dichos, and sayings from your own families and your own experiences, hearing about others actually fuels our resilience. So I wanted to ask, what fuels you when times get tough? So either unmute your mic or put it in the chat. We know that times in particular have been challenging. So what fuels you when times get tough? Would you like to share, Whitley?
I would. I pressed the wrong button by mistake.
No worries.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Whitley Johnson. I'm a director for Empower Me First at University of Miami. And when times get tough, prayer fuels me. I identify as Christian, but also music. So I think music can go with whatever mood you need it to, and it can make things better or worse. But it fuels things for me for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
So this is my posse. It's a group of 10 of us, all from Georgia. I have quite a few pictures that have all fallen down over the course of the past hour and a half, but having them next to me as I type and do work, they remind me and fuel me going through Worcester, because Worcester's tough. But they are representative of Georgia, of where I find home. They remind me of my own family. So if it's not this picture, it's probably a picture of my mom. So just, I think individuals and what they represent to me are what keep me going here at Worcester.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Caesar. Anyone else? All right. Let's see the chats. Yes, students fuel and keep us moving. Absolutely. And I said my twin brother. Wonderful. Talking with others and realizing I'm not alone. Absolutely. Music and dancing, very cathartic. Swella. Knowing that life doesn't stop. Cooking dishes for dinner. Yes, Christopher, you have to share with us some recipes. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for sharing these thoughts. Meditation. Yes, Dr. Troy, in our tribe. So important to have, that close circle. Absolutely. Thank you all so much. So essentially some parting words of wisdom, right? As we're coming to a close, I know we have other guest speakers, is I really think that in analyzing just, my research and my experience as a practitioner, it hones in on these, key strategies. So one of them is collect, and select. Have a mindset of abundance and a willingness to say yes to opportunities. Yes, imposter syndrome is real. yes, we know there are structural barriers, but one of the things that I'd really love first-gen low-income students to do is have a mindset of abundance, really consider the opportunities that maybe you've never even thought about and how you can say yes to those. The other thing that I want to impart on first-gen low-income students and practitioners is reflect on what fuels you. It could be family, opportunity, gratitude, work ethic, and sacrifice. There's so much research that talks about the power of reflection, particularly for first-generation college students, and how life-changing and transformative it could be. Third, lift as you climb, pay it forward, right? There's so many more students that sometimes we never get a chance to engage or learn about their stories. Let's make sure they're a part of the fold too. And then the last thing Dr. Troy put in the chat, your tribe, strategically build a support network. That's something that I remember feeling really intimidated doing when I was an undergrad student. I wasn't sure who to approach. I wasn't sure who to ask. I was worried about being a burden or taking up, someone's time. And one of the aspects that I want everyone to know is no one makes it alone. No one succeeds by themselves. And strategically building a support network, including the folks here. So you can count on me as being one of the folks that can be a part of your support network is so key because there's so many opportunities that are both personal and professional that I wouldn't have known had it not been for other folks that, spent the time and, gave me essentially nudges to consider what those aspects are. So those are the parting words of wisdom. And I want to just make sure that there's opportunity for Q&A. I've also listed my LinkedIn here and also my email address. So for students and also staff, please don't be a stranger. Our first gen community is small, right? So happy to be of service and happy to be a support member for any of you. And then I've listed some of my publications here that sort of grounds the work of being an asset-based scholar practitioner. So thank you all for having me. I'd like to just go ahead and stop my share so I can answer any questions in the few minutes that we have left. Let me just read the chat. Yes. Thank you, Lori, Chris, Danielle, and Dr. Troy. Yep. So does anyone have any questions I can help answer?
I have a question. Sure. So your research, was on first generation students for your dissertation, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And you're a first generation student. I guess I'm hoping you could speak to us, what was going through your mind when you were doing your research, when you were hearing all these things that others experienced?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many aspects. Thank you for that question. There were so many aspects that really resonated. I remember hearing concepts of what folks were sharing and both feeling a sense of validation, even as a professional, like, oh my gosh, I remember experiencing that and I experienced that now, right? And there was also this thought that came to my mind of how disappointing it was that there were still faculty, for example, that were telling students things like, don't ask a dumb question, I don't have time for that, right? Or telling students concepts of essentially being a gatekeeper. And I think that it helped me to understand that for our students, especially when they've worked so hard to sit in that classroom, how positive faculty interactions can sometimes be a challenge for our first generation college students. And that's something that has been a focal point of my professional career this time, because we know that when interactions with faculty are positive, that it does so much for first generation college students. So it was both this, concept of validation, but also we could be doing so much better, right? We could be doing so much better to create inclusive classrooms and climates for our students. And another aspect too that stood out to me is how there were a lot of informal networks in which first generation college students picked up ways to navigate the hidden curriculums. So they would hear about it from a cousin that went to school, or they would hear about it, from a student organization. And I think that's one thing that is often like uncelebrated in the literature, is the different ways that informal relationships also retain and keep students from, to achieve their dreams. So those were some of the things that were the thoughts running through my head. Yes, Christopher.
Hi, thanks for your talk. So I'm gonna putting my nerd hat on. I'm wondering what you think the future of like first gen research is headed, and also like how that relates. Like, will its relationship with practitioners, because I know a lot of people here are practitioners. Like, how does that relationship going to evolve, or will it?
Yeah, great question. So essentially, the things that I'm seeing a lot more of in first gen research are concepts related to career readiness. I'm also seeing a lot of concepts related to learning. So actually in our inaugural journal that's coming out this month, we have this really great synthesis of like a literature review of the different ways that faculty can change their pedagogy so that first generation classrooms do feel a sense of belonging. As far as bridging the gap for practitioners, I do think that there's a lot of folks like, myself who essentially straddle those worlds of being a scholar and a practitioner. So you're seeing more and more people in those similar fields, like essentially saying like, hey, this is the best ways to support first generation college students. This is what the research says. Here are some of the promising practices in the field. So I'm seeing more and more of that, which is exciting because we don't just want theories to get dusty on like a PDF, right? It's important that we're also testing some of those research theories in the field. And I think that's happening. And, I really credit first generation students being activists and saying, hey, we need to be supported better, as one of the ways in which we're seeing essentially institutions transform and change. First generation students aren't going anywhere. They are today's college going demographic. So that's one thing that I encourage all administrators to consider, that we need to evolve. We need to make sure that first gen students are supported from strengths-based ways.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to that. As a, when I was a first gen student, I found it like a lot easier to like find practitioners than it was to find like scholars.
Yeah.
So like if I was like a first gen student leader, where do I find you people?
Yeah.
Where do I look to find like
Yeah.
access higher levels of academia and research around first gen?
Sure. No, absolutely. So one of the things that I encourage every single institution to be able to do, yes, Tanya, love it, is to encourage their faculty to come out as first gen. So we have a colleague, her name is Dr. Covarrubias, and she actually has done research on this, where in a simple website directory, they listed faculty profiles. And when students read faculty profiles that said they were first gen or part of an affinity group, it actually made them more relatable and more approachable than when those identities are not listed. So at the University of California, we have this system-wide initiative across all the 10 UCs where we're asking faculty, like, come out, tell your students you're first gen. It's something to be proud of. And so we have first gen faculty that wear t-shirts, we give them lapel pins, we ask them to include it in their syllabi. It's such an easy way to foster a sense of belonging. So we started at UC San Diego by just circulating a simple Google form, putting their names on a PDF, and then it sort of led to this, phenomenal faculty first initiative, which I help lead on our campus. So it's so easy, and you're gonna notice that there's so many first gen faculty out there. So put it in your signature line, put it on your CV, put it in your classroom, whatever, right? Whether it's in person or virtual, because it really helps students phenomenally. Yes, absolutely, Lori. Staff. So we also celebrate first gen staff on our campus. So they have t-shirts, lapel pins. We're soon going to be launching like a first gen ally training. So then folks also have these placards. So I think that that's something that is particularly important, that is a celebrated identity. That's great to hear, Caesar. Awesome. Well, I know I'm at time, so thank you all so much for the opportunity to connect with each of you, especially since it's so late at night. Please reach out to me via LinkedIn or email. I'm happy to be of support. And just thank you again to the Aligned Planning Student Committee. I appreciate you all's time, and most importantly, your commitment and passion and dedication to this really important topic. So thanks again for having me.
Of course. So again, thank you to Dr. Troy and Dr. Romasanta for their keynote speeches. I think it was so reflective and a great note to start the conference on, because first gen students are resilient. And I think, you know, a lot of times we do get bogged down with like all what's going on. And something that Dr. Romasanta, Caesar and I talked about is that we want first gen students to be kinder to themselves, to understand everything that's going on in their life and all that they're doing and accomplishing, and understand that's so powerful and reflective, and it's going to be so beneficial for you as you start to navigate other aspects. And that is something that, you know, I just want every first gen student to understand and feel, because that took me, and I'm still working on it, like all 4 years of my undergrad, to like be like, okay, I can breathe, I can appreciate everything. So at this point, I do want to pay attention that at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the BIPOC FGLI session. This session will have William Washington from the Wellness Institution there and be present. It is focused for students of color. Faculty, administration, and staff are welcome to attend, but please note that this is mainly a space for students of color to participate and hear their voices. And with that in mind, we have about 10 minutes before that starts. So please, you know, use the restroom, take a break from Zoom. And if you haven't registered for that yet, you can still do that with the link that we have on our registration page. So we will see you all either at 8:30 or tomorrow for another session. Thank you.
All good. I'll go set up for William.